All right, coming to you live, high above Congress Street, it is the System Failure Podcast, lucky number 13.
Hey, Brian, how are you doing?
Pretty good.
Hasn't been that long since we last did a pod, of course. You had disappeared on us to Nashville, came back, so we had to record at an odd time, and so not too many days have passed since we recorded the last one, but we want to get back on that regular Thursday-ish release schedule, so here we are once again with another exciting edition of the old System Failure.
Yeah, well, I mean, we both just got back from voting, eh?
Yep. Today, of course, is the voting day in the good old US of A, and so we both got a chance to go down and make our voice heard at our municipality. It's not too exciting in the off season. I mean, it's not the midterm elections. It's not the presidential election. It's the one in between the midterm and the presidential election. So there were a few interesting referenda on the old ballot this time round. Which one interested you the most, Brian?
Well, I mean, basically we got to vote yes on question 3A, which, is a state takeover of CMP, the power company.
Yeah, I guess people are unhappy with the local electric concern around here in Maine. It's historically been Central Maine Power, an entity that is owned by a foreign Portuguese company called Iberdrola. And they've been gouging the citizenry to the point where this referendum popped up on the ballot, and we got to vote for a takeover. And I have to say, it is funny to see the propaganda come out, the millions of dollars that get extracted from Mainers and taken out of state by this Iberdrola. It's interesting to see how they try to spin it in the commercials, try to convince people that it would be not in their best interest to remove the profit motive from the provision of electric power. But in my way of thinking, and I'm guessing you'll probably agree, in a situation where there's no competition, where there's a monopoly, it really doesn't make sense to have people profiting.
Well, it's an exciting chance to, maybe somehow the cost of power will go up because of this, and our taxes will go up, and we'll long for the days when we had the cruel hand of CMP watching over us. I mean, I guess if that happens, well, then I guess I'll lean more libertarian in the future. But on the other hand, if this works, I mean, it is an exciting, piece of the dam breaking. Why not do things like this? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, the capitalist structure, the capitalist economic structure, really is if there's no competition, it really just becomes rent-seeking. It just really becomes a toll booth, and because we all need power to run our lives, they can just charge us whatever they want for us to go through the toll booth, and so so you really can't. It's like healthcare. It's one of these situations where without the competition, it just becomes a nightmare. I would be absolutely stunned if anything other than electric prices coming down as a result of this referendum. Now, we have to say that we don't know if it's passed or not yet, so it's just the way we voted. But last year in 2022, there was a provision on the ballot to soften the substantial rent control restrictions that we, the people of Portland, Maine, have voted to enact. Was that 2016? I think it has been 7 years now. And the measure was roundly defeated, which is to say, people seem to like their rent control. They enjoy not having the price of shelter jacked up, beyond everyone's ability to pay. And so we had another one of those referenda too on the ballot this year. And so I'll be this one seeks to exempt landlords that have 9 or fewer properties, but that's going to be like 90-something% of all landlords in the city. So it just seems like it's another attempt to give landlords license to charge whatever they want and extract even more wealth from the working class. So that's my vote for it was, and so my prediction here is that both the rent control this time around in 2023 and also the vote to create a electric company that has democratic oversight. I expect both of those things to pass, so it should be interesting going forward here.
Well, I mean, if question 3 gets defeated, I'll feel good about it just because, well, CMP's been bringing such a scorched earth campaign with their advertising. But on the other hand, I mean, they are like fighting for their life on this bill. So hopefully they can get snuffed out here. That'd be
Yeah,
pretty sweet.
yeah.
I guess the rent control. I mean, we don't live in a building that like would apply to that. I mean, 'cause, there's tons of people living here. So I guess I voted to not repeal it, right? So we voted no.
We're not going to make any. Right, it's a no, and so you wouldn't make any changes to the existing rent control law. So the counter argument is that developers will not develop any new buildings if they can't, if it's not so profitable they can gouge the hell out of the residents that live there. But I just can't believe that argument gets floated, because in the years leading up to the rent control ordinance first getting passed in 2016, rents were, wait for it, spiraling out of control. So I just the idea that rents might spiral out of control if we vote in rent control, I just don't even know. I'm not even sure how to argue against that, because it's like, well, it really can't be worse than it is now. We're having all of the restaurants down here in downtown Portland are all closing. Why? Because the banks have all blown out the cost of financing real estate, and the landlords have all jacked up rents to where small business owners really can't afford to pay like workers to come and work at their, like, it's not like no one's going to come work for your company if you aren't covering their rent, and if rent is jacked up, why then the workers aren't, you're going to have to pay an amount that's going to make it make sense for the workers to come to your place of business and work for you. And so we've lost Coffee by Design here on Congress Street, and we also lost the Starbucks on Congress Street within a few short weeks of each other. And so it's like, obviously the news here in Portland is the Coffee by Design enacted they voted to unionize, and so I'm sure that these you can just see that this is all connected. Of course, the other Starbucks here on the peninsula in Portland, Maine, last year voted to unionize, and instantly Starbucks corporate closed the store down.
Well, the other bugaboo is just that any housing that did get built is like, the rent starts at like $2,500, and it's not like any kind of affordable housing anyway. Yeah. The other piece to this rent control business is I don't think that it matters how you could produce 1 million units. I think what would happen is that those 1 million units would all be bought up by the same people, and you'd end up, it might drive rents down to have all those extra units, but it's not going to enable any extra ability of people to own houses. That is to say, the distribution is always going to go to the top tiny fraction of people. And now that mortgage rates are in the 8% range, the cost to buy a house with cash versus the cost to finance a house are wildly divergent. I think we've said it on this pod before, but the break even for a 30-year mortgage is a rate of 2.4%. Now, that is to say that over the course of a 30-year mortgage, you'll be buying the bank a second house if your mortgage rate is 2.4%. So I should really calculate how many extra houses you'll be buying at 8% over the course of a 30-year mortgage. But really, when you think about how many dollars you have to muster to finance a house versus just buy one with cash, it's just not even close. So the cash buyers they get a huge discount versus the rest of us. So it's a really big problem. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess in other news, well, I guess I just want to talk about Roger Waters a bit here.
Yes, the creative genius and bassist behind Pink Floyd, of course.
Well, we were talking about the podcast with Brett Weinstein. And, he was speculating about Rogers, anti-Semitism. Oh. And, well, we came down on Brett Weinstein a bit there. But, well, I guess I'm going to, come at it the other side a bit, though.
All right.
Well, Roger, he just did put out this tweet, and here's a Palestinian guy. He's got like his dead kid in like some kind of body bag thing held above his head, and he's like mourning. It's a pretty sad image. And Roger's saying in this tweet here, dear Annie Lennox, I know your heart is in the right place. Please stop appealing to both sides. There is no equivalence. There are the oppressed, the Palestinians, and the oppressor, the Israeli government. The oppressor has been murdering the oppressed for 75 years. Join the voice of the people and the huge worldwide choir of protest and demand that the Israeli fascists stop the genocide now. No ifs, no ands, no buts, now. But I guess, I feel like I disagree with Roger because, they just went and, slaughtered a bunch of, innocent Israeli people like Hamas here. And so I guess maybe Brett Weinstein sort of has a point here about Roger. Or, I mean, I guess I don't really know how you can look past like Hamas like slaughtering innocent Israelis like either though. Or are Israelis like not innocent? Or I mean, what do you think?
Well, okay, yeah, I feel like genocide is a little too strong a word. It's not as if the Palestinian population is gone, right? They're still there. There's more Palestinians today than there were 10 years ago. So maybe genocide is a little too strong a word for the oppression that's going on. But the Israelis are bombing, like they've killed 5,000 children, right? They're bombing like they're dropping bombs on children. Is that really something that is that really the necessary response? Like if we had a hostage situation here in like the domestic United States and people were using children as shields in the hostage, or the children were hostages, will we just gun them all down and be like, well, it sucks to be those children? You know, that's just no way to handle the situation, even if you describe it as a hostage situation. Which it kind of, I mean, there's literally Israeli hostages being held by Hamas, and also it's like Hamas wants to, it's like they want to generate a suicide by cop situation to generate sympathy on the world stage, maybe. And the Israelis are just obliging them by carpet bombing children. I got to think there's a better play in the playbook here for the Israelis. And then, of course, the other thing that Roger's quote makes me think about is that quote by Bibi Netanyahu about the best hope for the Israelis to take hold of the West Bank is to fund Hamas, right? I mean, it's definitely a crazy situation.
Well,
But the idea that Roger's an anti-Semite or is suspicious of Jews, look, I mean, we grew up in a strange religion that none of our friends were, and so maybe I just think of Jewish people as that. They just have a non-majority religion, and they're otherwise just white people. That's the way my mind. I just think of Jewish people. I don't really differentiate them they don't have there's nothing about them that they just look basically white like us, and so maybe I am oversimplifying the situation, but I just don't think that Roger's coming from a place of anti-Semitism. I think he's coming from a place of compassion for the children that are getting blown to pieces here, even though they're being used like chess pieces.
Yeah, I don't really think he's coming from a place of anti-Semitism either. I mean, I definitely wouldn't call it that. But I don't know, like, what is Hamas supposed to have gained? Like, I mean, like, why did they go and attack Israel here, like, and, do the initial massacre here that caused all this slaughter? I mean, it seems like it's pretty much guaranteed to create the result that it did. And so I guess I just don't understand. Like, I mean, if they're trying to preserve their own children, they should, like, not do that. I mean, is the plan to be like Osama bin Laden, basically, and try to bait the United States into entangling themselves into some crazy conflict that, is going to ruin the empire, basically?
I don't know. I can't imagine that's it. It does seem like there's a somewhat of an analog here between the Ukraine situation, where I can't imagine what the U.S. hopes to gain with a diplomatic philosophy of just expanding a quote-unquote defensive military alliance right up to the borders of Russia itself. Like, what did you think was going to happen? There's only one way this can play out. And so maybe, and dare we swerve once again to the dip our toes into conspiracy territory, but maybe there's more going on here than we have a line of sight on. Certainly, the news media has been deplorable in virtually all aspects as long as I can remember. So maybe there's things going on that aren't being reported on. Maybe there are chess pieces being moved that we can't see. We can't see the grand strategy yet. Maybe that's the case. I don't know.
Well, I guess with the Ukraine, I mean, it just seems like it's just part of like the flaw in our system. We just don't have any choice but brinksmanship with Russia. I mean, we just have this. We got to build bombs, and we got to do something with them. And so we got to send them to Ukraine and, I don't know, saber rattle with Russia. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't understand, what Hamas is hoping to gain here. But I guess, I mean, maybe we'll find out someday.
Well, I don't know, but I do feel that we are marching towards I have a sense of impending climax. I wonder if a great many people share that as well.
Well, just one thing is that I think this is causing like a rift in American politics. I mean, well, you just see like the government kind of has to support Israel, but I mean, we've kind of, I mean, the Democrats also run on, being like pro minorities and oppressed people, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's really is going to have, it's not just so simple that we can just support Israel like we have in the past and like across college campuses. There's a lot of people who are upset about what Israel's doing. So, I mean, I guess if you just looked at like what the results are, I mean, maybe it's not crazy to say that it is some kind of like Osama bin Laden, kind of baiting, like maybe like Iran or maybe Russia or maybe like the other forces that aren't part of like, America's power network, smell weakness. And so, I mean, that's why this is happening, basically as an extension of that.
Yes, I agree with you. It's not, the sense of impending climax does not come, I think, from the level of military conflict we're seeing now in the Holy Land or in Ukraine. The sense of climax that I feel comes from this. Since 2016, the establishment has contained people within the two-party duopoly, the two-party dichotomy, by accusing people that support the Donald of being, bigoted in some way. Like if you support the Donald, you must hate trans people, or if you support the Donald, this must sound familiar. And if there's a silver lining to the god-awful situation in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, it's this. Here at home in the domestic conversation, in the domestic discourse, we aren't going to be able to get away with just calling people bigots who don't vote within the two-party dichotomy, right? Like, it has been the opinion expressed over and over and over again on social media, as far as I can see, that when people suggest there's something wrong with the two-party duopoly and maybe we ought not to vote for Joe Biden, that now that it's we have to vote for Joe Biden, it's a moral emergency because the Donald is going to overturn democracy, which, by the way, the charge of the Donald overturning democracy, I find... Well, first of all, it's funny that the DNC has done everything they can to prevent any sort of democracy in the primary process and has gone so far as to go to court and assure the judge that this is a private organization and we can nominate whoever we want. We do not have to have any deference to democratic ideals whatsoever. And then I do remember like Hillary Clinton saying that the only reason that Donald was elected in 2016 was because Moscow had like tipped the election and somehow. And I think we have the right to remember in 2000 the Al Gore George Bush thing in Florida, where in Volusia County all kinds of black people were kicked off the ballots. Volusia County being a critical county where Daytona Beach is in Florida, and then Secretary of State Katherine Harris certifying the election quickly before the I think it was the state Supreme Court in Florida could rule on the matter. So they just sealed George Bush winning Florida, and by George Bush winning Florida, he won the 2000 presidential election. And so, like, the idea that elections are tampered with is a charge that got bandied about freely right up until 2020, when the Donald said it. Suddenly, it was an attack on democracy. And it's just, I find it impossible to take it seriously. But the point here is that I don't think that we're going to be able to accuse people who aren't invested in, like, if you don't support Joe Biden, you could be not supporting Joe Biden and coming from a place of support from the Palestinians, or that's another way to say that the crazy lefty opinion, that the crazy lefty pro-Hamas opinion is going to really throw a monkey wrench into this whole business of accusing people that don't vote for Joe Biden of being a bigot. And that is awesome. We desperately need that. As I've articulated on this hallowed podcast many a time, I do think the 2016 election is a direct result of our failure to properly deal with 2008, and the threads of 2008 go back deep into our history, and we can definitely get into that. But first, I want to get your reaction to my little monologue there.
Dang. Well, I mean, I guess this is pretty grim. This war in the Holy Land is like a boon in some ways. But yeah, I mean, that is just the case, right? I mean, maybe if you don't vote for Biden, it doesn't mean that you hate women or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, First, I always it's always humorous to me to notice like the symmetry between the things that Donald gets accused of, which, look, the Donald's a sleazy guy and there's no question he's guilty of any number of ridiculous things. I really don't want to be in the camp of defending Trump, but it's so the things that he's like guilty of are like Biden is also like, it's like nepotism within the family and selling out influence to Russia or China in the case of, or Ukraine in the case of Hunter Biden, or having classified documents on your email server. Like Biden got hit with that, Pence got hit with that, Hillary Clinton got hit with that. Or sexual harassment. There's Tara Reid who said that Biden pushed her up against a bookcase and jammed his hand up under her skirt. You're like, that's uncomfortable, man. That's not what you hate to hear it. But I mean, the Donald is clearly has a crazy attitude towards women. At least it appears that way to me. But I feel like, Joe Biden probably has similar sorts of attitudes. It's just that the news media declines to report on that, because the thing about the Donald is that he's a showman. He's a P.T. Barnum, carnival barker type, but he comes from outside he comes from outside the political establishment. That is to say, the established interests in D.C. don't have control over him like they seem to with all the other politicians we have on offer.
Well, this idea that we're going to trust the establishment to bring equity to like minorities and oppressed people when they're like primarily responsible for the oppression of minorities is completely insane.
Yeah, it's like
it's some real Stockholm syndrome going on.
It's like Martin Luther King Jr. on our postage stamps with his statue, down in DC. You're like, wow, this is a guy who was like opposed to the establishment, but it's now like The Blob, that old Halloween horror movie. Like it's now like soaked up the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and now like adorns itself and dresses up as if it's sympathetic to that. Absolutely wild.
Yep.
We have we in America are a part of a great, revolutionary history. We not only threw off King George III in the 1770s and fought a revolutionary war against him, but in the 19th century as well. I mean, on the white side of the chessboard, we had Andrew Jackson getting rid of the national banks. We have Abraham Lincoln funding the Civil War by just printing money rather than first borrowing it from the rich. We have Teddy Roosevelt busting up all the trusts, and all that culminated in FDR soaking the rich to fund New Deal to fund like the Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge and unemployment insurance and Social Security. The list of expensive programs goes on and on and on. And it really does feel like post World War II, aided by the power of the intelligence services, the spy services, all of that has been rolled back. There was also this business in the 19th century about getting the economists at all of the stuffy institutions of learning in this country to annihilate any distinction between earned and unearned income, the thing that obsessed with early capitalist writers like David Ricardo and John Stuart Mill and Adam Smith. And just say, well, if you've got the money, you must have earned it legitimately, and so we're not going to make a distinction between earned and unearned income. And by the way, we're going to tally up GDP. We're going to count up all the inflated rents here in Portland and add that to GDP as if that's earned income. It's really interesting. I think our parents, the boomers, they were born into such good economic times that it created a corner in time that they couldn't see around looking backwards in time. And so it has been a multi-generational decline in the living standards of the American middle class, which is now all but vanished. And now we have a whole generation locked out of home ownership. Like, I have no idea how I'm ever going to go own a home. I mean, if you don't inherit it, then it's going to be impossible to get into it. That is until the apparatus of credit collapses, and home prices will have to underange themselves at that point. But that's the climax that I see. I see the Gaza conflict is fitting into that broader arc, at least here in the domestic political discourse. Just on the Gaza conflict, I mean, we were talking in the previous podcast about, how, the Messiah comes back when there's war in the Middle East. Yeah.
And I suppose it's too early to tell if this conflict in the Middle East is enough to like break the narrative that, you're a bigot if you don't support Joe Biden. But I mean, you can see maybe like how like why the war in the Holy Land is so like prophetic or so. I mean, it's just. I mean, it's gonna have like a giant impact on like it seems like on like all of our lives, and we're tied into it. Like you just on that little. Just on how it changes, it's changing the dialogue, already, which is interesting. I think you'd have to say.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, the thing that really kickstarted my brain like a Harley Davidson motorcycle was when I was in student loan debt, and I realized that the Bible has all of this apocalyptic. Obviously, there's the Book of Revelations, but Jesus' obsession with debt and taking of interest, really, I just can't believe these things are all connected. I just laid out the brief and super simplified economic history of America. But it is very interesting that the drums of war in the Middle East should coincide with the moment when we're having a massive debt crisis. And the reason for that is that, look, if there's a point to spirituality, it's that you sacrifice yourself, the essence of your being, for the broader trajectory of humankind. And one of the prime implements that is the exact opposite of that is debt, or people that are already rich getting richer off of interest. That really is fascinating to me, that so much of Christianity and even Judaism is the old and the books of Islam. Like these Abrahamic religions are like primarily about debt, and it's absolutely wild that we are coming to grips with that we have a debt problem in the United States at the same moment that the aforementioned drums of war are pounding in the Holy Land. It's like, the reality is crazier than I could possibly have imagined when I was younger.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
It is crazy. Maybe we did too many mushrooms, and now this is happening.
Yeah, we broke reality personally, but maybe that's the case.
Yeah.
It does seem like the clues are all there in the old holy books. And now that our society ignores those holy books, we are destined on a trajectory of Armageddon and ruin and calamity, the likes of which we probably can't imagine.
Well, I mean, it's crazier than I would have expected, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, just the 90s were just such a, like the Berlin Wall had come down, and, I was just watching, Rugrats and Doug on Nickelodeon and playing with my Legos and playing the Super Mario World. And things have quickly spiraled out of control.
Yeah, well, so the boomers, I think they probably would. They seemed aware that there was something wrong with our culture, especially with the Vietnam War, like the deployment of troops to Vietnam to drop like white phosphorus on Vietnamese villages. And in the name of fighting against, like, we don't want them to embrace this like economic ideal, really seemed suspect. Something about that obviously sent the boomers into a tizzy, but they never really could identify the bars of the cage they were locked in. And so they gave birth to our generation, and just like them, we were unsuspecting with our Legos and our Harry Potter and the aforementioned Rugrats. And so it's really interesting to see that the chickens are going to have to come home to roost on our watch. That really is an eyebrow raiser. And wild stuff, man. It's just a crazy time to be alive.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about it.
Well, in relationship to the 2008 and to the plot starting in 2008, one interesting thing we've not brought up on the pod that I keep meaning to bring up is the incident with Sarah Silverman in 2016 at the Comcast Center in downtown Philadelphia. Now, this is something we could I'll put a YouTube link in the show notes. But we may remember that Bernie, having been callously discarded by the DNC, his delegates thronged to Philadelphia to try to get the man, to try at least to voice their displeasure that the man wasn't going to be nominated. And they were confiscating Bernie Sanders signs and cutting the crowd noise in such a way that you couldn't tell the entire joint was booing. And then the whole thing culminated when they had the comedian Sarah Silverman trying to put a good face on the DNC. And she had this like routine she was going to go up to the microphone and do, but when she got to the lectern, she couldn't get through it because everyone was booing so heartily that she just started saying, "You're being ridiculous. What are you doing? You have to accept the lesser of two evils here." And that moment, we'll put the YouTube clip, the link to the YouTube clip in the show notes. And that really, I think, was the beginning. The recognition that something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. And so I think it remains to be seen that whether or not the recognition that something's gone wrong is definitely there. It has been there low these past 8 years, and the only thing that's kept it lurking below the surface is this notion that it's an emergency. We have to make sure that Donald doesn't get elected and then doesn't get elected again, and they're gonna try to. We've got exactly a year now the next election, and you can bet they're going to be trying to deploy that eye-rolling tactic once again. And man, I sure hope that as I already said, if there's one silver lining to the horror that's going on in the Gaza Strip at this hour, that maybe the destruction of that political that conversation, that artifact of discourse, we can finally put a nail in that coffin.
I think we can feel safely vindicated in saying that, no, Sarah Silverman, you are in fact being ridiculous.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. And I had another thing to bring up here, the matter of Mr. RFK Jr. and in the revelation this week that he had flown one time on the old Epstein Express. Apparently, he and his family took a Epstein plane from was it New York or Boston down to Miami, and I don't know. Mr. Kennedy is going to be here in Portland tomorrow, but the fact that he is totally on the side of the Israelis on this, and not somewhere in between, like maybe you or I are, Brian, is interesting. It makes me think maybe I should vote for Cornel West, but I do love the idea that the son of Bobby Kennedy and the nephew of Jack Kennedy, who were casualties of the seizure of power by the intelligence services in the 60s, would be the one to... It's like there was a poll that had him polling at like 24%. Ross Perot got 19% in 1992. And that 22% is so exciting. I am absolutely crestfallen to hear about his flights on the Lolita Express and his unmitigated support for the Israeli cause. That is a big disappointment. How disappointing is that to you, Brian? And will that affect your hope to vote for RFK in the general 1 year from today?
Well, my thought that is if RFK, if he's backing Israel, I mean, it probably increases his chance of actually winning. Just because you need the backing of some powerful forces to actually get through. And, obviously the Donald, famously had the backing of Israel and supported, moving the capital to Jerusalem or
the U.S. Embassy, right, to Jerusalem.
That's it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it is disappointing. It's certainly not what I would expect.
Will it deter you from voting for Mr. RFK Jr.?
Well, I mean, if the choices were like the Donald, the Biden, and RFK, I mean, I think you'd have to vote for RFK.
Okay, agreed. Me too. What about Mr. West? Or Dr. West, excuse me. Cornel West has his doctorate degree.
Well... I mean, I guess I haven't heard Dr. West speak as much, and I don't know how viable his candidacy is. If RFK really has a real shot, and I mean, I guess this business with Israel makes me think that maybe he's serious, just because I mean he's got you got to do it to have a chance here. I mean, but on the other hand, maybe the paradigm is changing, as we were talking about before. And so, I mean, I just say it because, I mean, supporting Israel has been key in the past to being a success in America politically. And so maybe that's just no longer the case. And, RFK is going to undermine himself by being in the past, and he's progressive on a lot of issues, but not this one. And that's going to be his his shot at candidacy here.
All right. Well, I have to say it's very encouraging for me to hear you say that, because you're just brushing this off your shoulder, which is awesome. That's what I would like to do. I have to admit to being disturbed, but less so hearing that you are not so disturbed. So I guess that's great. That's what I wanted to hear anyway. So that's That's good.
I mean, I don't know how many. What does it mean to fly on Epstein's plane one time? I guess it'd be better if it was 0.
His fam was his wife and was with him, right? So it's like probably. I mean, it's not like the man was flying off to that crazy island in the USVI or wherever Epstein's island was, and banging out some underage prostitutes. I guess they're victims if they're underage, right? You wouldn't want to call them prostitutes.
Yeah.
Ugh, good Lord.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we'll see. I mean, if RFK is going to be on the waterfront tomorrow, I guess it'd be interesting to hear what he has. It's probably something worth seeing. Maybe we can, corner him and ask him, about Epstein somehow.
Please, Mr. Kennedy, why were you on the Epstein Express, and what's going on with this Israeli opinion of yours? Is it really, maybe off the record he can reassure us that this is just a political expediency. And maybe then I don't know.
Well, he does. I mean, someone probably should ask him about Epstein. Like, we've all been busy. I mean, like, he's on like Rogan, talking about like COVID and the medical healthcare industrial complex. It would be interesting to hear what he has to say on the topic. And so, I mean, I would say this is his big chance.
I find RFK's anti-vaxxer status to be extremely exciting. And the reason for that is that I think that, what I had let's see how to properly broach this one. In 1987, U.S. District Court Judge Susan Getzendana ruled that the American Medical Association engaged in an unlawful conspiracy in restraint of trade to contain and eliminate the chiropractic profession. That's a quote, a direct quote from her ruling, to contain and eliminate the chiropractic profession, and that ruling got upheld by the appeals court. And so it's like true to say that the AMA, the country's biggest professional organization of doctors, is like guilty of an illegal conspiracy to quash chiropractic. Now we should mention both of our parents are chiropractors, so we kind of grew up in that realm. And I wouldn't want to comment on chiropractic other than to suggest that if it was just quackery or woo, then the AMA wouldn't feel the need to illegally conspire against it. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that the demonization of alternative medicine is akin to the burning of witches during the Middle Ages. There's the political repression of alternative forms of medicine goes all the way back to 198 BC when the Roman Senate brought down the cult of Dionysus. I think we've talked about this on the pod here before. They brought this woman named Pacula Ania up on charges. She was a witch. She was a high priestess of the cult of Bacchus. And then once Christianity took over the Roman Empire, the emperors of Rome destroyed the sanctuary of Demeter at Eleusis. Now, it's interesting because the cult of Bacchus and Dionysus comes from the cult of Eleusis. The cult of Eleusis was the upper class version where they took psychedelic drugs, and then the secret recipe of how to concoct an ergot potion that wouldn't kill the person drinking it was liberated, and that gave rise to the cult of Dionysus. And the Senate in 198 BC didn't love the idea of a wildly popular intoxication religion that they didn't have control of. Like the old aristocratic families always had control of what was going on at Eleusis, but not of the cult of Dionysus. But once Christianity took over, the Christian emperors of Rome ordered the widespread destruction of everything pagan, and they were trying to shake the Etch-a-Sketch and prevent any alternative from taking root. That they didn't want any alternative to challenge their political power, and that involved the cult of Eleusis was conceptualized as feminine. It was run by priestesses, and the psychedelic secret itself is conceived as feminine. And so that all translated into this demonization of women that evolved into the witchcraft and the publication of this crazy book, the Malleus Maleficarum, which was the first widely reproduced book by the printing press in Europe, more so than the Bible. All this is a long way of saying that alternative medicine and the burning of witches and the drug war, right, the imprisoning of nonviolent drug offenders, these are all harvests of the innocent designed to prop up political power. And so it brings me a lot of joy to hear RFK going on about his anti-vax views. I think that that's very exciting. Well, what do you think, Brian? I mean, do you think that that the anti-vax thing gives him an air of authenticity, which RFK's support of the Israelis' actions in the West Bank does not, does the exact opposite?
Well, I mean, it seems pretty apparent from where I stand that, the medical industrial complex is out of control.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's pretty controversial. I mean, people tend to love the medical system, I guess. I mean, obviously in America, we have like the unhealthiest looking people. And it seems like chiropractors, I mean, they at least seem to be in this position where they tell you to, like exercise and drink water and stretch. And, I guess regular doctors do that too, but it also seems like they just prescribe a lot of drugs and get people addicted to opiates. And, they have like these pain management clinics. I mean, and like Quick Care is like, that's where like everyone goes for like care now. I mean,
like those urgent care clinics?
Yeah. And so
we went to one of those when Tracy, my lovely fiance, had an eye infection. We went to the urgent care clinic. The man who saw her was an incompetent, appallingly so. It ended up with the situation escalated into an emergency because he had no idea what he was looking at.
Well, I mean, I got the COVID. Which COVID vaccine was it that we got?
The J&J, the single dose. That's what I got too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was required after I had already had the COVID, and I also got the COVID after having the vaccine again. And so I don't know. It didn't really the vaccine seemed completely pointless. I don't know. Like it's a giant issue, and obviously it's one that I lack expertise on other than common sense. But I don't know, just requiring vaccines, regardless of if you've actually had the COVID, and they had to change the definition of natural immunity to not include getting the COVID naturally. I mean,
I would say, generally speaking, that I agree with your contention here. The vociferousness with which the vaccine was insisted upon is deeply suspicious.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was crazy times during the COVID. I mean, you'd have to respect it as you got. People did turn into Nazis, narking on their neighbors or whatever,
demanding papers in order to go to work or to get on a flight.
Yeah, and then but the thing is though, I mean, if you're sufficiently afraid of the COVID, then all of that seems like a necessary thing to do. But if you're not afraid of the COVID, then it seems like Nazism. And so if you're not afraid, it's easy to say, that we're making our society, more like Hitler's regime.
They definitely preyed upon people's anxiety and neuroses, right, by telling you this is by playing up the danger of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes down to how you assess that risk. And obviously I was at no risk, and I don't really have people who are especially at risk to spread the COVID too. So I don't know. I mean, I guess, I'm sympathetic to people who are afraid of the COVID, and I don't know. People form their decisions kind of based on the movie they're watching. And so I don't really want to like throw fire on the situation and say that people who are afraid of the COVID, didn't have legitimate reasons to feel that way.
They're true believers, it's like people that go to church and believe what the church tells them. You're going to blame them for it? I mean,
there's going to be some church-centric way to reframe that. The heathens are, I don't know, lead crazy moralist lives, or that would be how how they would frame it.
It's a good point, because like if you get carried away in the groupthink in the church, right? Just like with the Third Reich, the group is capable of doing some terrifying things to people who belong in the outgroup, like they did to witches during the late Middle Ages when they burned tens of thousands of women at the stake for witchcraft.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I guess I see things via the movie that I do, and there's really suspicious things, like calling ivermectin horse dewormer, and then they have to like take a picture of Joe Rogan and turn it yellow when he's got the COVID. And engage in this sensationalism. And I mean, well, ultimately, it is what it is. I mean, probably like a million or people so died from the COVID, and I mean that's a lot. On the other hand, like a lot of people die anyway, and a lot of those people who died were people who were very old and close to death anyway. It finished a lot of people, who were close to death. So I don't know.
Took down a lot of people by improperly intubating them, also cutting a hole in their throat and jamming a tube down there. When that's not at all the proper response to the dropping O2 stats people had as a result of COVID. So the priesthood definitely thrashed around. It didn't quite know how to respond properly to the situation. That's for sure. I do think that it's like that old parable with the goldfish, like the two young goldfish swimming along. How many times have we heard this? And the old goldfish swims by and says, "Hey boys, the water's nice today." And one young goldfish looks at the other and says, "What's that old man on about? What water's he talking about?" The point being that the things that the whatever exists all the time, you don't notice. Whatever is constant, that just becomes background noise and not noticeable. And I think our religion's not Christianity. Our religion is science, right? We believe in the representations of the hall that come to us from the authorities in the Hall of Science, right? That's our priesthood. And it's not surprising that people believed what that priesthood was telling us. But let's be real, that the medical industrial complex has overseen a collapse in public health of historic proportions in this country in terms of obesity and cancer. I mean, the number 1, 2, and 3 causes of death in this country is heart disease, cancer, and then doctor screw-ups. If you can, I could put that quote in that article from CNBC in the show notes too. That it will, these people are. And this has been my problem with the medical profession for a long time. I think virtually to a person, those who work in the healthcare industry have their heart in the right place, but they allow their authority to cloud their judgment. They will not admit when they don't know. And I had a neck issue when I signed up for the really good health insurance one year, and I made the rounds. And if you've got a problem that they've seen 1,000 times before, they'll be able to fix you right up. But they hadn't seen my problem before, and they wouldn't admit that they didn't know. That was what drove me crazy. I had to go down each one of their little treatment plan paths, only to find out that they had no idea and were just bumbling. And they wouldn't admit that they were using guess and check sort of problem solving. They wouldn't, because they fancied themselves an authority, and they just couldn't. They wouldn't be honest that they didn't know. And if they would have just admitted that, it would have made my attempt to get care from them much easier, much less crazy, much more sensical.
Well, I mean, guess and check is a method, unless you have like a bone sticking through your leg, but if you have some kind of internal malady, I mean, that's just the only way they just have to guess and check and be confident that they're gonna get the answer eventually. I get it. So a lot of times in my life, guess and check is my only tool in my toolbox. I just want them to admit that that's what they're doing rather than putting on airs of authority. That's my problem. Yeah, well, I I mean, I'd say your best bet is to you solve your own health problems. Stay out the hospital as much as you can. And,
diet and exercise, and stay out the hospital, man. You go into that hospital, they're just going to have one crazy idea after another about. Again, look, if I get into a car accident and I have a compound fracture, as you mentioned, please, by all means, take me to they're going to know how to best deal with it. And I will admit this: I told a nasty story about the urgent care clinic here with respect to my fiance's eye infection. But then we went to Mass General Eye and Ear down in Boston, and I got to behold, for the first time in my life, stone cold medical competence. There was a Chinese doctor there, a woman who had a frigid bedside manner, but she knew exactly what she was doing, and we were very grateful for her. So it's important to not have to have your opinion be a little bit more balanced than the one I just expressed. That's for sure.
Well, at any rate, I mean, it's just this tried and true move to, drum up fear to create some kind of political change that the government wants.
Compliance.
Or to at least capitalize on the fear out there. Well, it just so brazenly happened after 9/11. And, the issue of health was a much more perfect way to do that, because we can't argue about whether or not a terrorist attack is happening, or there was just the one terrorist attack on 9/11 basically, and eventually emotions wore thin, and the populace didn't have to turn on each other the mask wearers versus the non-mask wearers, and the vaccinated versus the anti-vaxxers. And authority is a thing on the medical front where you don't need some kind of degree to say whether a terrorist attack has happened. So
it's right. You're right. We're really talking about it. It makes me think of the Black Death coming to Europe. The church. Look, the church, the smartest people, the only literate people, and everyone in your town during the Middle Ages was going to be the priest, the only guy that could read. And all those guys those priests were all involved in giving out last rites. They were exposed to infected bodies. They died at greater rates than the rest of the population. It became really clear, the church had no germ theory of disease, of course, because this is the summer of 1349. And so without a germ theory of disease, they were operating with a wrath of God theory of disease, and that turned out to be laughable. And their authority was just utterly destroyed. But the destruction of that authority was the catalyst for the changing of the era. So maybe we can be hopeful. I'm hoping to create a little bit of a more optimistic tone here, because it's been a lot of doom and gloom thus far on this edition, number 13 of the System Failure Podcast.
Well, I would say that 9/11 seemed significant at the time, and at the time, I opposed getting involved in wars in the Middle East. And when the COVID happened, it seemed significant, and I guess I opposed, mandating health mandates. And now this war in the Middle East is happening, and it seems significant. And I guess I oppose killing Palestinians. I suppose killing Israelis too.
Definitely.
We took the opposite took on today, and it feels significant. Yeah. So, definitely some interesting pieces of the puzzle fleshing out. I don't know, the bigger whole, or something's going on.
Well, I reckon one thing's for goddamn sure. We are going to be in for an interesting 12 months here in the lead up to the 2024 presidential election in the good old US of A. I think we shall not want for entertainment during the upcoming 12 months. Yikes.
It should be pretty dramatic. Well, you got lots of great plot points. The Donald's going through some kind of trial right now.
And, how much legal perfidy is that? The guy, how much legal jeopardy is he? He's got 5 trials going on, something ridiculous like that.
Yep.
Prosecution of politicians.
The war in the Middle East, the business in the Ukraine. We'll have to see what happens.
I suspect that it's economics under the hood across the board. And that what's happened here is that the ruling class has opened up such a sizable lead over the rest of us in terms of it's just like Rome, there's a gulf between the rich and the poor opening up that's completely unsustainable. And so far, we've dealt with that gulf by borrowing money from the rich instead of taxing it away from them. But that's created a debt that we don't want to admit can't be paid. And I think that's the real story of 2008. Rather than admitting all of those mortgages weren't going to be paid, we just had the Federal Reserve monetize those debts so that the banks wouldn't have to take a write-down, and thereby connected what should have been a private debt crisis for those banks, connected it to our currency and made a sovereign debt crisis that we're waiting to shake out. Now, so I suspect that these are all, I just have a feeling that's the case. And I don't quite know where to point to exactly where the connection is, but I think that admitting the debts can't be paid, once that horse gets out the barn, the rich, so much of the wealth of the rich is in future money that we owe to them, that we've promised them. And once it becomes clear that we've promised them more money than we can ever possibly hope to pay them, we're going to have a renegotiating of the deal. And I think that's what they're putting off and have been putting off since 2008. And that's what the 2016 election was all about.
Well, after the Great Depression, we had the New Deal. But I mean, how much did we actually admit that the debts couldn't be paid back then and kick the can down the road by having World War II and then this century approximately of America dominating the world and so having this giant distraction from the economic truth, I guess.
Yeah, that's really been the story of the takeover of the intelligence services in the early 60s here in the U.S. and every decade since then. I think trying to prop up this growing mass of wealth that it sucks in like a black hole. It sucks in more wealth and more wealth every year, and the more wealth it sucks in, the more wealth it sucks in the next year because of the glorious principle of compound interest, which was warned so vociferously against in the Bible.
But so do you think that it was a different situation back then? It's only really after 2008 that we'd have to say the debts couldn't be paid, and I guess we decided things were too big to fail. Or was it repeating a process that happened back in 1912 or whatever?
I think what you had in America in the late 19th century was the Gilded Age. I think Titanic with Caledon Hockley, and the very very class-oriented view that the Titanic film from 1996 or 1997, 1998, whenever that film came out, was very stratified by class. And the New Deal wasn't about it wasn't about the emergency of debt forgiveness, but about stopping us from going down that road. In other words, the New Deal and the Russian Revolution that came a couple years before it were the culmination of the Industrial Revolution. I'd also include the revolutions of 1848 in there, also the French and American revolutions when we got rid of the crowned heads of Christendom by and large, or relegated them to the status of figureheads and installed all manner of congresses and legislatures and parliaments instead. So I think that the outbreak of democracy was going on in earnest in the 19th century, culminated in the Russian Revolution and the New Deal of 1917 and the 1930s, and then was arrested by the concentration of power here in America that resulted from World War II. So I think that we're still... I think that's the broad map of where we are historically.
Well, at any rate, I mean, I certainly agree that we're in the time where we have the excess of materials, but we're not in the time where we have the best distribution method. And so there's some inherent tension there. I mean, I guess I'm ever skeptical that it's about to change, but maybe.
Oh man, I really think I really feel it. I think that we are heading towards some historical climax, as I've mentioned about 3 times already on this pod, and I think that's the reason to be endlessly optimistic. That's where I am feeling this election day, Brian.
All right. I guess that's a fine enough place to wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, before we head out, I just do want to invite people to send us an email at nop.substack.com. That's our last name. It's spelled with a K, so that's KNOPP at substack.com. Send us an email. Let us know why we're crazy and how we've got everything wrong. We'll totally read it on the air. And if you want to know more about the parallels between healthcare and the burning of witches and the incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders and the oppression of the intoxication cults of classical antiquity and how all of that fits together with the Holy Grail and the sacred feminine, then check out my upcoming Substack article, which will be out next week. And you can find that at not.substack.com.
All right, sounds good.
Alrighty, Brian. We'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.
We'll see you.